Welcome to everyone, and thank you all for making the time to join us at Let's Talk Democracy tonight. This is our final session of our four-part series, Why Democracy Matters. Thank you to all of you who have gathered with us here in community in person at the First Presbyterian Church of Forest Hills. It's so great to see you, and we need each other at a time like this, and it feels good to be together. We are grateful to Reverend Jeff Porter for his hospitality and vigorous support of our mission. There's a donation box at the back for any contributions to the church you can manage. There are also handouts in the back on media and other groups working to save our democracy from Professor Krasner. I want to thank Michelle Aragon and Maria Kaufer for helping us with the tech tonight, making it possible for us to hear Professor Krasner from Vermont, and to welcome all of you joining us from home on Zoom and live stream. This is also our fourth hybrid event, and we are hoping tonight reflects our diligent attention to details and that we get it all right this time. Others make this hybrid thing look easy, but we have found that it is anything but. We thank you for your patience. Let's Talk Democracy is a grassroots group dedicated to educating people about our government, encouraging dialogue about the basic foundations of our democracy, and empowering citizens to make their voices heard. My name is Ida Masana. I'm a retired physician and founder of Let's Talk Democracy. Our website is www.letstalkdemocracy.org, and our job tonight is to understand the growing threats to democracy and reinvigorate our commitment to defending it. Democracy is not a partisan issue. It's what actually welcomes different ideas to truly address the real problems that face our nation. But it cannot defend itself. Maybe we are the leaders we have been waiting for. Two events to mention. Worth Fighting For is a local activist group having a meeting on Sunday at 1 to 3 here in the church. All right, this is our final event in a four-part series of Why Democracy Matters. Previous events were recorded and should be on our website in case you missed or want to revisit. Over these past few weeks, Michael Krasner, award-winning professor of political science at Queens College and co-director of the Taft Institute for Government and Civic Education, has been helping us focus on the backstory of where we find ourselves today. How the government has tilted the scales on important aspects of our lives, from the American dream to civil rights. Many of us grew up during this heyday when government did a lot for people. Not perfect, but they tried. Then last week, we saw how both political parties since the 1970s contributed to the decline of the middle class and our stature in the world at large. For the past 50 years, and those of us who are older than that remember a better time. But this is the only part of our shared experience that our young people have seen and lived through. So it is not surprising that people born in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s who are now in their 20s, 30s, and 40s have little confidence that either party is able to deliver for them. Professor Krasner pointed out the defeats of the Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan wars, the aftermath of 9/11, the 2008 recession, the role of tech and the media, and all the decisions and policies which contributed to the staggering income and wealth inequality. Many ask, what's the use of government? Where is the fairness? To many, government feels irrelevant in their daily struggles. Perhaps there is a generational divide with respect to our expectations of government and the rule of law. But we have to reckon with the fact that for the past 5 decades, we have been slowly and consistently rolling out the red carpet for the strongman who alone can fix it. And that's where we are tonight. Professor Krasner will talk about our current situation and what we can do about it. Thank you, Michael, for all your work in putting this series together and for your friendship and unwavering support of Let's Talk Democracy over these years. Here is my question. What will it take to actually make America great again for us regular people? We look forward to a lively discussion at the end, both in person and online. I will handle the questions and comments from those here in the church, and Maria will be watching the hand raise and chat online. Remember, in order to allow as many people to participate as possible, please keep your comments short and focused. Our other rules of engagement are be respectful of others and their point of view. No photos of participants, please. Raise your hand and wait to be recognized by the moderator. Don't interrupt. Avoid making generalizations or assumptions. Use I statements and speak from your own experience, and no personal attacks. And now I turn the mic over to Michael Krasner.
Thank you, Ida, and thank you, Michelle and Maria and Jeff in the First Presbyterian Church. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can put up my PowerPoint. So as Ida says, this is our fourth and final session in the four-part series, which is focused on where things stand now in Washington and what we can do. And two caveats to begin with. There's too much too much going on to cover everything. So I'm doing my best in this presentation to cover the most important stuff. And all of it is tough. All of it's unpleasant. So if you need to pour yourself something soothing before we begin, please feel free to do so. I'm working on coffee, but you can do something stronger. So here's an incomplete list of things that are happening these days in Washington. The president is unilaterally trying to change the Constitution and to reshape election laws to give himself and his party an advantage in the next elections. The federal government is being purged for political purposes. There are attacks taking place on major institutions of civil society. Agencies of the federal government that were created and funded by the Congress are being attacked, dismantled, paralyzed, and the whole apparatus of the federal government, what we've referred to as the administrative state, is being attacked. In addition, the rights guaranteed by the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, what we call civil rights and civil liberties, are under attack, along with the rule of law and government accountability. That's a lot, and it's a lot on purpose. You know the phrase from Steve Bannon about flooding the zone with shit. This is a conscious strategy which is aimed at overwhelming the opposition, demoralizing them, that is to say, us, making us give up and go away. And there were some signs after the election and in the first days of the Trump administration that this might be working, that people did seem unable to cope. But there are signs more recently of a revival of resistance with lawsuits, the April 5th demonstrations, Cory Booker's speech, and other signs of revival. So let's begin with the assertions of unilateral presidential power. The president on his own has issued an executive order aimed at overturning birthright citizenship, which is guaranteed in the 14th Amendment. It simply says that anybody born on American soil is automatically a citizen. It was part of the package of amendments passed after the Civil War that aimed to give enslaved people all the rights of citizens. It's supported by precedent and practice. And in addition, this is the formal attempt to change the Constitution. The informal attempt that Trump is making to change the Constitution has to do with the two-term limit for presidents. He's talked about getting around that, but hasn't issued an executive order about it. We'll come back and talk more about birthright citizenship, but I want to mention now that the president has also, by executive order, attempted to change the rules for federal elections, including saying that in order to prove in order to register to vote, you have to prove your citizenship. How do you do that? Well, you've got to have a certified copy of your birth certificate. The one you've had kicking around in your file drawer won't do. You've got to go back to whoever issued it in the first place and get a certified one. And then you've got to present it in person to the local election board. So that's burdensome enough. But it's particularly complicated for married women who have changed their name. That's 82% of the women who get married in the United States that do that, because the name on the birth certificate's not going to be the same as the name on, that they're using now, their married name. And that means that they've got to also have a copy of their marriage license. So there's a serious burden that's being created for married women who are trying to register either for the first time or trying to re-register. And you all know that women in general tend to vote for the Democrats. So this is not coincidental. This is voter suppression. That and the attempt to limit the counting of absentee ballots. This is in line with the long-standing Republican effort to make it more difficult for people who tend to vote against Republicans to participate in our elections. President and his minions have also gone about purging the federal government for political purposes. They have gotten rid of top generals and admirals. Their excuse has been that these people are committed to DEI, but the more sinister interpretation is that they're trying to get rid of people who might resist the president's orders to use the military to suppress dissent.
No, I would say you missed one point actually, because
You need you to mute yourself, please.
Oh,
I'm sorry, this is a presentation by Professor Krasner where we have a Q&A later. Please mute yourself.
okay, I just want to clear something. That's why I just unmuted. Okay, sorry.
When the Black Lives Matter protests were taking place, President Trump asked the top generals if they couldn't perhaps shoot the demonstrators in the legs. The sinister interpretation of this purge of the military is that he's looking to get officers in place who will carry out that kind of order. In addition to that purge, 19 inspectors general, the watchdogs in various government agencies, the people who are supposed to look out for abuse, for fraud, have been fired, including the one at the Pentagon. Okay, and in the Department of Justice, I was about to start the discussion resist of the attacks on major institutions, including the very blatantly corrupt deal to get Mayor Adams in New York City to participate in the president's immigration policies in exchange for the dropping of the federal corruption charges against him. The attorneys in the Justice Department who objected to that have either resigned or been fired. And in addition, the attorneys and FBI agents who worked on cases involving the January 6th assault on the Capitol to prevent the peaceful transfer of power, those people have been fired as well. Which began with attacks on the media. And you probably know that Trump sued ABC, which settled a lawsuit that a lot of people thought they could win for $15 million. That CBS has also come under fire and is compromising. That various owners of newspapers, including Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, censored their papers, prevented editorials being published that endorsed Trump's rival in the 2024 presidential election, and that Bezos has since also announced that there will be bi-weekly free enterprise editorials at the Washington Post. The Post also censored its cartoonist, anti-Trump, anti-corporate ad, and she quit as a result of that censorship. Here's the cartoon. I thought you might like to see it.
No, thank you.
This figure is Jeff Bezos offering money to Trump. This is Mark Zuckerberg. This is Sam Altman from OpenAI. This is the owner of the LA Times, Patrick Soon-Shiong. And he's not offering money. He's got a lipstick, which I think is a reference to the difficulty that you have disguising a pig with lipstick. And here you have Mickey Mouse in an obedient position representing ABC. So that's the cartoon that was censored out of the Washington Post. Why are the media caving in this way? One explanation is that they're not just media. The Washington Post and most of these institutions, they're part of bigger conglomerates. Obviously, the Washington Post is part of Bezos's empire, which has obviously Amazon, a huge retail operation, but also big government contracts for their cloud computing enterprises. That means they've got a lot to lose. They've got a lot of irons in the fire. In the old days, the media were standalone
Michel,
They
can
had
you
some
please mute yourself?
commitment to journalistic ethics
Michel,
and standards. Now the commitment is to the bottom line. Now the commitment is to profits. This is an example of obeying in advance. Timothy Snyder, the wonderful theorist about tyranny, in his book on tyranny, which I highly recommend, one of the maxims in there is don't obey in advance, because that's what tyrants depend on. And that's exactly what we see these people doing.
no, Michel, please mute
Universities
yourself.
are also under attack, as you probably know.
Michel,
The pretext is anti-Semitism, but don't believe that. The threat to withhold $400 million in federal funds in Colombia in order to have them crack down even harder on protesters. Colombia did that, not only promising to crack down on protesters, but putting one department, the Department of Middle Eastern Studies, in receivership. More recently, the administration has threatened to withhold $9 billion from Harvard. They're in the process of caving in, despite protests from students and faculty. Why is this happening? Why are the universities caving in? Aren't they supposed to be bastions of free speech? Isn't academic freedom supposed to be something that they uphold? Well, legal power at universities rests with the board of trustees, and they are increasingly big businessmen. And they're not so concerned with academic freedom. They're actually looking to expand their own power and to neutralize the troublesome faculty and the disobedient students. They want control. Kathleen Frank, a law professor who was driven out of Columbia for her support for free speech, says in a wonderful quotation, Columbia is a real estate holding company that teaches classes as a side hustle, meaning that Columbia's real estate interests, they're the biggest residential landlord in Manhattan, in the eyes of the trustees, are probably more important than anything else. So again, it's the concern for the bottom line. There are a few courageous university presidents who stood up, but it looks as though most of them are going to cave in. Final example of attacks on civil society, Trump's attacks on the big law firms. He went after some of the biggest and most prestigious.
Kathleen Meyer kicked her out.
Those that have offended Trump. Here are some examples of the law firms and what they did. And here are the sanctions against them. These make it impossible for these would make it impossible for the firms to operate. In addition to suspending their government contracts, security clearances are being revoked, means they can't work on cases that involve sensitive governmental institution. Most experts' opinion is that these orders are blatantly unconstitutional, and the three law firms that sued did get immediate relief in court. But many, Skadden Arps, some of the biggest ones, have given in, again, obeying in advance, sometimes before they were targeted, and promised millions of free legal services to the causes and organizations that Trump prefers. And the obvious reason is that they're afraid and not willing to fight. So these divide and conquer strategies have been working. Why target these three, the media, the universities, and the law firms? They are all sources of potential potent opposition. The media, if it fulfills its function, is supposed to expose wrongdoing. They're supposed to be watchdogs, supposed to tell the public what the government is doing or not doing. The universities have traditionally been centers of protest. Law firms represent clients who oppose Trump. Law firms bring cases that expose law breaking. If you're thinking about breaking the law, you don't want law firms around. More generally, if you back off a little bit and look at the bigger picture, this situation represents the power of oligarchs within our society, the power and the cowardice of billionaires. It reminds us that long before Trump appeared, we had gone some distance down the path toward an oligarchy. And these billionaires control not just these big civil society organizations, but also billionaires control, as you know, and influence elections through their donations. The door to that process was opened by the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United. I'm coming now to Trump's attack on government and beginning with the Independent Regulatory Commission, set up by Congress to be semi-independent, to regulate a piece of the economy. The National Labor Relations Board does relations between workers and bosses. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission does job discrimination. These organizations are supposed to be independent of the elected branches. They have staggered terms. You can only remove commissioners for cause. Trump's going ahead and firing them anyway. And there are cases in court. Unfortunately, it seems likely that the Supreme Court, when the cases get there, are going to agree with Trump. There's this crackpot unitary executive theory that says the president should be all powerful within the executive branch. So it looks as though the express intent and goal of Congress in creating these independent regulatory agencies is going to be overridden by this extremist Supreme Court at the behest of this extremist president. Shifting now to talking not about the independent regulatory commissions, but the more traditional departments, what are sometimes referred to as line agencies, the ones that are just carrying out the laws. We see an example in the Agency of International Development of an outfit that's been almost entirely dismantled, despite the fact that, again, it was set up by the Congress and funded by the Congress. Can a president do that? Well, the case is in court, and maybe it's going to get decided in favor of the Congress and its power. So the de jure result may be that this agency is, quote, saved and resurrected, but the de facto result, what's there in the real world, is going to be different. That agency is going to be impossible to reconstruct in the short term. It's going to take years because everybody's been fired. Everybody's been shoved out of their offices. The building's been locked up. People who used to work there, like everybody else, like you, like me, they got bills, they got families, they got to put food on the table. They've gone and looked for work someplace else. And the relationships that that agency had all around the world, those have been shattered as well. Coming now to the Social Security Agency, you probably know that there have been big cuts in Social Security. And the effects of these are being felt as we speak. The website has crashed several times. There are long wait times on the telephone. Wild, unproven accusations are being floated about Social Security and its efficiency and so on. And it seems fairly clear, you don't have to be a genius to see, that this is a prelude, a pretext, an excuse for privatization. They're going to be saying, as Elon Musk has said already, oh, it doesn't work. It's a Ponzi scheme. We have to privatize it. And, you know, the irritating part about this is it doesn't work because of the cuts. It doesn't work because it's been attacked in this way. General attacks on the federal government. One thing that hasn't gotten the attention maybe that it deserves is the way in which Musk and his minions, the guys who are going into the Treasury Department and Social Security and HHS and all the others, these guys are computer engineers, and they're getting access to huge databases, all kinds of personal information that Treasury had, that Social Security had, and others. Now, obviously, this is extremely problematic just in terms of privacy. I mean, do you want Elon Musk to know about your tax return? I don't. But it's even more scary in political terms. There's a power dimension to this. It can factor very strongly in elections because this data, how much people make, what their social security is. This can be used in what's called micro-targeting. It can be used to tailor messages to them, customized messages to them in the campaigns. So the question of who has this data and who will be able to use it at election time is a very big and important one. Other general attacks, across the board freezes on spending. These are also in court being challenged. The firing of probationary workers also in court. Arbitrary reductions without rationale. All of this greatly reduces the ability of the federal government to control corporations. Government regulation of the economy is being systematically undermined. And it interesting to note that before all this started, there were 32 pending actions by federal agencies against companies that Elon Musk controls. And I think it's fair to say that most of those have been neutralized by what Musk and his people have been doing within the federal government. Not a coincidence. This is an example of the general aim. The general aim is simply to destroy the administrative state that was created by the New Deal and maintained and expanded since then, and to go back to unregulated capitalism, back to the 1800s, back to the days when there were no labor unions, back to the days when there were no pesky regulations or government inspectors. In addition to the attacks on the federal government, there have been attacks on the civil liberties of individual people. And here I'm going to be talking first about people who are not citizens, but it's important to understand that all the precedents, all the legal framework of American jurisprudence says that people who are in the United States are protected by the same civil liberties and civil rights that citizens have. So Mahmoud Khalil and Rumeysa Ozturk, Khalil is a green card holder. He's a legal permanent resident. Ozturk was here on a student visa, but they should have been entitled to First Amendment protections the same as us citizens. They were arrested. Some people have used the term abducted for reasons that will become clear as I get further into my discussion, by people in plain clothes. In Ozturk's case, many of them wearing masks, using unmarked vehicles. They refused to name themselves. They refused to identify themselves. They refused to identify the agency that they came from. They did not have legitimate warrants for the arrests that they were carrying out. And even though they said that student visas had been revoked, that green cards had been revoked, there was no prior notice of this, which means there was no due process, as well as no freedom of speech. These people were being punished for their political activity. They had spoken out against Israeli and American policy toward Palestinians. The crucial point here is that if you, meaning a citizen, a person, in the United States, if you don't know who, what, or why is happening, you cannot hold the government accountable. This means a serious attack. This is a serious attack on the rule of law. These are the methods of dictatorship. And Masha Gessen, the wonderful writer on autocracy, who's a columnist now for the New York Times, has written very persuasively about this, saying these events represent the coming of the police state to our country. They may be starting with students and green card holders, but this is the thin end of the wedge. If these cases are upheld, then they can move to stripping citizenship from naturalized citizens. And if that's upheld, they can start on the rest of us, on birthright citizens. In other words, we're all at risk. So how should we think about this? How should we understand this? What's a good framework? Well, commonly people refer to autocracy, authoritarianism, and all that's fine. That's true as far as it goes. But I'm suggesting that we need something more specific because there's lots of different kinds of autocracy. That just means rule from the top down, usually with one person in charge. So here are two similar specific forms of autocracy. Again, using Masha Gessen in his very good book, which I recommend highly, Surviving Autocracy, And he's drawing on the work of a Hungarian sociologist named Balint Magyar, who uses the term mafia state to refer to the governments that have risen in the former Soviet republics in Eastern Europe and in the Caucasus. A mafia state where the ruler acts like a mafia boss. Think Marlon Brando. Think of the personal rule over subordinates that he first and then his son Michael used, where they're doling out favors and money and power based on their assessments of the loyalty of the underlings. Jonathan Rauch recently in The Atlantic wrote an article that cited the work of two political scientists, their book called The Assault on the State, which, full disclosure, I have not read. But the idea is patrimonialism. Very similar, a personalized rule, but they use the analogy of the family, as the word suggests, the tough father, the dominant man in the family who rules over the family and again dispenses favors and fortune on a personalized basis. Examples of this are Putin in Russia, Orban in Hungary. They don't care about a government that can deliver services. What they care about is enhancing their own power and enhancing their own fortunes, their own profits, their own bank accounts. They want to use the state to intimidate critics, spread fear. They attack potential opponents in civil society. Well, that should sound familiar. We just went through the attacks on civil society, as well as the punishment against critics, potential critics. Now I ask you to think about tariffs. Can we fit tariffs into this framework? Trump's tariffs are large and indiscriminate, with the exception of the ones targeted toward China. Experts have said that this doesn't make a lot of sense, that Trump doesn't understand the economy, that his formula is stupid and irrational. I suggest to you, they're missing the point. That's not the way to understand this or anything else that Trump does. Think instead about tariffs as a personal weapon, not as policy. He's not interested in what he says he's interested in. He's not interested in restoring American manufacturing. No, he's looking for personal power. He's looking to force corporations or foreign governments or groups like farmers to come to him and make concessions, to come to him and ask for favors, to come to him because they're in a weak and vulnerable position. Here's a quotation from The Political Scene, a terrific podcast from The New Yorker with three of their excellent journalists. The quotation is, "Tariffs give maximum power to him," meaning Trump, "like a boss, to sit there and do thumbs up or thumbs down on each of the different constituencies to come and beg. And he loves to say, they begged me for this, they begged me for that." In addition to using tariffs in this way, I want to suggest to you that corruption is a major theme in this personal politics, that it's very likely that at this moment, Trump and his henchmen are preparing the biggest grift maybe in the history of the world. Here's the evidence that they're preparing for corruption on a grand scale. We've already mentioned that they fired the 19 inspector generals, including the one at the Pentagon, the people who are mandated to look for corruption in the government. They have gutted the enforcement of laws against foreign influence, disbanded the Department of Justice Foreign Influence Task Force, cut back on the enforcement of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. That's the one that Mike Flynn ran afoul of in the first Trump.
You are a complete fucking idiot, a useless, pathetic waste of space. Your brain must be broken because nothing you
Michael, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Now we can. We missed a couple of like 30
Yeah,
seconds.
I'm going back. They've disbanded the Department of Justice Foreign Influence Task Force. They've cut back on the Foreign Agents Registration Act. This is the one that says that if you're lobbying for a foreign government, you've got to register. It's got to be out in the open. They've suspended enforcement of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. This is the one that outlaws bribery. So it raises the question, what's the deal? What's the deal Trump's making? Is he making it with Musk? Have they got something going on? Is Musk going to transfer some of his billions to Trump? Are they working on some kind of joint enterprise? Are they the ones that are going to take over Gaza and make it into a playground for rich people? Or is he trying to make a deal with somebody overseas? Is it Putin? Is it the Saudis? We don't know. But my strong suspicion is behind the scenes, behind all of these controversial actions, the smoke and the mirrors, the distractions, something like this is going on. So if it's true, if the interpretation that Trump is pushing forward on all these fronts for personal power, and if he succeeds, if the deportations continue, if the violations of civil liberties are upheld, if the big institutions continue to concede to him, if he's able to continue destroying agencies, impounding funds, then the balance of power will have shifted very substantially to the president. We'll have something that looks like strongman rule, and our constitutional principles like checks and balances will be gone. And the protections for individuals, civil liberties, the rule of law will be gone. So I would say against people who say, oh, we're only going to have a constitutional crisis if the president defies a court order. No, we're in a constitutional crisis. We're teetering now on the edge of a government that's very unlike the government that we've had before. Will the court save us? I'm going to suggest to you that it's unlikely. Why? Well, in the first place, the head court, the one that's going to make the ultimate decisions, is already an extremist organization that supports Trump and his movement. Further, the courts are slow and the executive branch is fast. Same point applies here. They can destroy something before the courts can act, and the courts lack enforcement power. As far as the extremism of the Supreme Court is concerned, I assume I don't have to rehearse this in great detail. You know that the court gave the 2000 election to the Republicans in a blatant political action, that they opened the door for big contributions from corporations and billionaires in Citizens United, that they gutted the Voting Rights Act that prevented white supremacist Southern states from making it hard for Black people and other people of color to vote, that they overturned Roe versus Wade, that they've attacked the administrative state, and that they've given huge immunity to Trump and other presidents for so-called official acts. Is there hope? If we can't get help from the courts, is there still hope? Yes, there's plenty of hope, and there's a lot that we can do. We have to kind of rescue ourselves here, folks. And there are questions about strategy and tactics. But there's a hopeful example. Poland is a country that in recent years has moved a long way down the same road to autocracy. One party rule by the Law and Justice Party. But in the 2023 elections, there were reversals. A guy named Donald Tusk led something called the Civic Coalition, which won 53.7% of the vote and a majority of the seats in the parliament. They campaigned particularly against the Peace and Justice Party's attempt to take over and politicize the judiciary. The lawyers and judges, the officers of the court, went out into the country to educate voters, to tell them the story. Other issues were the relation to the European Union, which the Peace and Justice Party wanted to sever, and a promise to restore abortion rights. There were very high turnouts, particularly among women and young people. And as we saw before, the result was that this pro-democratic coalition won a majority of the popular vote and the seats in the parliament. My view is that it was crucial for those judges and lawyers to go out into the country to educate, to tell a good, compelling story. one that changed people's votes. As we've noted, Trump is a very good storyteller. There needs to be a counter narrative. We need to tell the story that indicts him. This failed, this effort, even though there was that committee, this story was not well told. It gave him a chance, the failure to do that gave him the chance to muddy the waters. We need to try again. We need to show that he's threatening freedom. We need to show he's hurting people. Their stories need to be told. The people who are suffering from the cuts that are being made in the federal government, the people on Social Security, the people who've been fired out of their jobs, their stories need to be told. We have to show that he's defying the Constitution and the law, and we have to show just plain and simple, he is not a good guy. We need the educator. We need the functional equivalent of those Polish judges and lawyers. Can the Democrats do this? Maybe. There's a need for a credible national leader or a whole army of local leaders. The Democrats have made a start. Cory Booker's speech, there was a shadow committee hearing on the rule of law that showcased courageous people, but there's also a need for a theme. And I'm going to suggest one to you. I'm going to make a modest proposal for a theme. My theme echoes the language that most of us learned to describe the Constitution. I think it avoids triggering words and standard left-right rhetoric. I think it gets past polarization. You'll be the judges. I'm offering the theme of balance, which echoes checks and balances. Pretty much everybody has a thumbs up view of balance. Everybody's in favor of balance. How can you be against balance? It not only speaks to the grotesque excesses of income and wealth that our country suffers from now, but also to the swollen power that Trump's exercising and trying to inflate even more, and the power that the unelected Elon Musk wields, and the big money interests generally. You can also use balance to justify certain social programs like free tuition for higher ed and the earned income tax credit, and justify higher taxes on the rich who aren't paying their fair share now. All this can be justified as restoring the balance and leveling the playing field. Going back to what we can do. We can keep pushing, especially elected officials, pushing the ones who aren't being aggressive enough and supporting the ones who are in challenging Trump and what he's trying to do. We can keep writing and speaking in favor of the freedoms we cherish: free elections, civil liberties, rule of law, government accountability. We can keep pointing out how attacks on other people, not necessarily citizens, threaten all of us and are profoundly against our traditions and our constitutional liberties and human decency. We can take care of each other and of ourselves. We can give ourselves time for rest and recreation and a little bit of time for fun. And I hope there was some fun tonight amidst all the tough news. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Michael. We're in the church, and I'm looking to see if people have questions or comments. Yes, we have one here.
Thank you, Michael. We love you. I think the idea is to pick a cause. I mean, there's so many things that, we just over the top about. I think, I pick a cause. My cause is healthcare. I'm New York City retired. We are fighting for our rights because it's so everyone into Medicare Advantage. And it's not just New York City retirees, it's anyone who's over 65. He's out to destroy our healthcare. And what's interesting, thing is, like, healthcare is not like left or right, it's everyone. And people, people should just think about that.
If I understood the question, it has to do with the attempt to push everybody off of traditional Medicare and onto Medicare Advantage plans. And this is part of the general push toward the right, the idea that everything should be in the market and the government, should be greatly reduced in size. And it is, as I think you suggested, a truly terrible idea. Those Medicare Advantage plans make their money by depriving people of services when they need them, and have a proven track record of leaving people in terrible need when they are ill or injured, and depriving them of the of the services, the healthcare that they need. So this is a very bad idea, and it's typical of the efforts that are coming out of this extreme right-wing coalition, that their concern is to follow their ideology, this neoliberal ideology, which says, the market's always better, government's always bad, corporations are always good, and we should just let the corporations do everything. This is simply factually wrong. And it's also morally reprehensible because it deprives people of what they need. And the hope is that we can tell that story too. That's another story that should be told. The horror stories of people deprived of medical care by Medicare Advantage plans, by companies like Aetna, those horror stories should be told, and they should become the basis of campaigns to protect Medicare and prevent the privatization that will serve only the interests of the corporations and the billionaires who profit from them.
Thank you, Michael. And as a physician, I can definitely testify that while I think the number now is 50% of the Medicare recipients are now on Medicare Advantage, and it's only to the advantage of the companies that offer these plans. They're kind of funny. Sometimes people are on them, don't even realize that they're on them. But it's very important for people who are in the Medicare population to hold on to their traditional Medicare. The Medicare Advantage. So Medicare Advantage is basically a way to privatize Medicare. Medicare is a government program, and it's a way of privatizing Medicare. So if you have Medicare that is actually United, or is actually Aetna, or is actually there are tons of them, Blue Cross, they all have Medicare Advantage plans. And sometimes very hard to know whether you have, that's kind of sneaky about it. A lot of times it's very hard to know whether or not you have a Medicare Advantage plan. Okay. Maria, do you have a question over there?
Nope, we've got nothing.
All right, I'm going to ask a question, and then Michelle and Peter, we have three people here. So my question to you, Michael, is how, I was happy to hear about this People's Cabinet or this shadow cabinet. What's your feeling about whether that is something that will take off or will have an effect on the situation?
Yeah, I think theoretically, like it a lot. I've been suggesting something along these lines for some time myself. I like the idea of designated spokespeople. The hope is that they will acquire legitimacy and get attention from the media. But at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I'm going to say again that they need to be telling stories. If they are making kind of standard political speeches with a lot of multi-syllable words, talking in those kinds of academic language about the ways in which government programs are being taken apart, or whatever the topic is, if they're talking abstractly and in generalizations, I think this is all going to fall flat. It's got to be done in story form. We've got to see the people. We've got to hear them speak and tell their own stories. Whatever the realm is, if it's the shadow secretary for transportation or the shadow secretary for health and human services, whatever it is, that person's got to be telling stories about how real human beings who are named got hurt. If you think all the way back to the election between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, you have an example of how storytelling, concrete, personalized storytelling, is the most effective political weapon you can imagine. Romney presented himself as Trump presents himself, as a successful businessman. And the Obama campaign succeeded in reframing him as a ruthless, predatory capitalist. And the way they did that was by putting on individual human beings who had worked for companies that Bain Capital, the investment firm that Romney was associated with, had taken over in the way that private equity does, and in many cases stripped the workers of their benefits. And the Obama campaign found a couple, a family, where the man had been stripped of his health care, had cancer, and I think eventually died from it. But whatever the details are, it was that story of the family's suffering that was used to reframe Romney and make him into, an unattractive candidate. So that's the way to go. It's got to be personal. It's got to be concrete. It's got to be specific. Don't talk in abstract terms. Don't talk in generalizations. Don't offer a lot of statistics. Don't tell me, the percentage of this. No, tell me about people. Tell me about who's getting hurt. Tell me why this matters in personal terms.
Michelle?
Hi, Michael, thank you. My question is about the fact that most of what he's doing is through presidential executive orders, nothing through bills, nothing, that really goes through Congress. Are there any limitations at all, or can he just go into the hundreds and hundreds of executive orders to do all the things that he wants to do?
There's no limit on the number of executive orders that a president can put forth. The limits normally come from the other branches of government. The limits normally come from the system of checks and balances that the framers tried to establish. Ordinarily, if there were a president who was taking apart agencies that had been put together by the Congress, created by them, funded by them, you would expect some resistance, even from members of his own party. And there are two very powerful reasons why that's not happening, why the Republicans aren't defending, the Republicans in the Congress, the Republicans in the Senate, the Republicans in the House of Representatives are not defending their own power. They're not defending the prerogatives of the Congress. Why aren't they? I suggest to you there are two big reasons. One is political fear, and one is straight physical fear. The political fear is, if I go against Trump, I'm going to get a primary opponent. And that primary opponent is going to be lavishly funded by Elon Musk, who's got more money than God and can afford to finance every campaign for Congress if he wants to. So I'm going to have a very well-funded candidate running against me. And he's going to have the backing of all the MAGA people, the cult that follows Trump, and they're the majority. in the Republican Party. So I'm going to lose in the primary. My political career is going to be over if I go against Trump. So that's one source of people being intimidated and not defending their own power. The second one is simple physical fear. People who publicly oppose Trump, people he points his finger at, become targets for extremists who threaten their lives and the lives of their families. That scares people. There's good evidence to suggest that after January 6th, the senators, the Republican senators who were being asked to vote on the second impeachment refused to vote in favor of impeachment because they were afraid for themselves and their families. And they had cause.
Maria, your turn. Do you have anyone there? I think
Yes,
there were.
Sylvia, why don't you go ahead?
Okay. I thank you again, Michael, for giving us all this detailed background to explain the horrors that we see happening every day. Last time together, we were talking about the upcoming demonstrations on April 5th, I think. For that, I could see on MSNBC, they were huge. So many cities. And in small cities, huge for those little cities or little areas. But I presume Congress has some concern about all these people, since these are the constituents and they have to be elected again. But does Trump, and I was going to say Musk, but I don't understand that whole thing about how this private control of our government, an elected person, is affected by anything. But does it affect the authoritarians? And you talk about stories, many of the signs were so creative. I can't quote them now, but they were telling people's personal agony or the issue that was so affecting their lives, and that's why they were out. In some places on a rainy day, it didn't matter. And of course, once again, I salute Ida and Let's Talk Democracy group volunteers who put themselves on the line. But will that tremendous demonstration across the country, and I heard some in Europe also, have an effect on our president?
Alas, I'm afraid they will not. He will rationalize and deny. He will say that the crowds were, artificially increased by paying people to demonstrate. He will quarrel with the statistics. He will simply ignore all of that because he cares about two things and two things only. He cares about his own power and he cares about his own personal fortune, his money. And what the majority of the people think is of no concern to him. He does not care at all. You could have had 40 million people in the streets and it would still make no difference to him. He is going to use the power that he's acquired to advance his own interests, and we won't make a difference with him. Our efforts have to be directed elsewhere. Our efforts have to be directed at energizing and supporting the opposition to him, and maybe converting some Republicans, who knows, maybe it's possible, and maybe appealing to the middle range of voters who aren't strongly committed one way or the other, either Republicans or Democrats, independents, people who don't pay that much attention to politics, maybe making an impression on them so that in the 2026 and 2028, and subsequent elections, there's a majority voting against this kind of right-wing extremism. That's the task.
We have a number of questions here. Peter, you're next.
Yeah, this is a minor point on the Medicare Advantage situation is, I think it's important for us here in New York City to realize this is coming from New York City, from our New York City government, and we do have an election coming up soon. And there have been a lot of right-wing tendencies in our New York City government. It's also been quite corrupt, and we no longer have the people looking over it in the government. That has been even paralyzed. And it's just important to realize this is coming from within. Thank you, that's all.
Yeah, as a retiree from the City University, I can second all of those emotions. We retirees have been the target of a corrupt deal between the big unions and a succession of mayors, which aimed to deprive us of traditional Medicare and push us into Medicare Advantage programs. And fortunately, there's an independent organization that's formed and raised money and financed lawsuits. And so far, we've been winning in court. So knock on wood, we may be able to retain our Medicare. But you're absolutely right that it's being threatened by the very people who should instead be protecting us.
Thank you. Maria, do you have somebody?
I do have somebody. First, I wanted to read some comments in the chat, or there's like a question. So first, Alice had written, oh, the Supreme Court just ordered the Trump administration to bring Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia home. And then Michael Slater had written, what do you think of Governor Pritzker of Michigan? He seems to me to be positioning himself for larger office. And Michael also wrote, Romney deeply offended every dog owner in the country by carrying his dog in a cage on the top of his car while on a vacation trip. Yeah. And then Melissa did point something very important. She put in, for the ranked choice primary ballot in June, leave anyone who you absolutely do not want to win blank. So just leave them off of your ranked choice ballot. You can rank up to 5 people. And I just want to put in that I do recommend filling in all 5 if there are 5 that you think you are okay with. Because Eric Adams won by 0.79% of the vote in the 6th round of ranked choice voting with less than 7,000 votes. And so to be careful who you rank. And in 2021, when we first had it in the mayoral, I think most people ranked 2 or 3 and didn't fill out all 5. I think voters were trying, they were saying, I was just at a meeting last night, but we have to help them to pick as many as possible, but to make sure to leave off anyone that they really think would be awful. Just do not rank them at all. So sorry, Michael, go ahead with the
Yeah,
choice
I'm
part.
going to use the question about Pritzker to make a larger point that I should have made when I was talking about the Polish example and the possibility of coming back from autocracy. The test for Pritzker and for any potential leader of the opposition is whether or not they can hold together a broad pro-democracy coalition. We're not going to get a big coalition that agrees on every single policy. We're not going to get a big coalition where, you know, everybody's in favor of Medicare for all, or everybody's in favor of free tuition, you know, in higher education. But we might be able to put together a coalition, a majority coalition, based on we want to protect our civil liberties. We don't want the kind of arbitrary power that's being exercised by Trump and Musk. We don't want some unelected billionaire with his nose in our private files. We don't want him or his people looking at our income tax returns. So the question for Pritzker or anybody else who's trying to put together that big coalition that will include not just traditional Democrats, but also the people I mentioned before, the people in the center, the people who may not be paying much attention to politics. Some of the people that voted for Trump because they thought, well, he's a businessman, he'll be good for the economy. Someone who can tell the story that brings people together in a pro-democracy coalition is who we're looking for. That's the trick. That's the person. Whether Pritzker's that person, or Gretchen Whitmer is that person, or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is that person, I think that all remains to be seen. I think whoever does that, whoever's going to try to do that, has to use social media in a way that so far no Democrat has. They've got to reach people who are only reachable through social media. So that, I think, is one test of the savvy, but also the political talent that we need if we're going to successfully put that coalition together. So I can't tell you whether Pritzker has that kind of savvy or that kind of talent, but I do think that's the standard of judgment. That's what we should be looking for.
Thank you, Michael. We have a number of questions here in the church. I'm going to go with Greta.
I was wondering, in the last couple of days since he instituted those crazy since Trump instituted those crazy tariff edicts, there seems to polls are seeing lower, that his popularity has dropped in these couple of days. And what I'm wondering is if that continues, if stories really start to be told and the wider citizenship tells their tales of woe as they'll be feeling them, if that could affect the midterms in a way where Republicans fear losing their individual power, or do they fear Trump more and his retribution in the next couple of years more than their own positions?
No, you raised the right question. Will the effects of Trump's selfish, erratic policies, I use the word policies in quotes, right? Because he doesn't really have policies in the same way that other politicians do, for the reasons that I suggested. But the things that Trump does, if the effects of them are felt widely enough, the harm that he does felt widely enough, so that it begins to impact people's voting choices, and a Republican congressperson, or maybe even a Republican senator running for reelection, looks at this and says, hell, I'm a certain loser if I stick with this guy. So, maybe I am going to get a primary, and maybe that primary opponent's going to have a ton of money. I got to take that chance, because otherwise I'm going to lose. I got to go against Trump, because otherwise I'm a dead duck politically, and I'm going to hire the security that I need to protect me and my family, or I'm going to send them, for the next 6 months to live with my wife's sister in Anchorage, Alaska, or whatever. And they go against him. It's a possibility. And maybe that leads to the broader coalition that I was just talking about. So I mean, we shouldn't overestimate Trump. He does things that hurt him politically. The tariffs are going to hurt him politically. And the question is how much, and can anybody take advantage of it?
Thank you, Michael. We have quite a few more questions here, but I see that we're running out of time. I think it's Maria's chance now.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for this program. It's been very enlightening. I appreciate that. So my question is, Adam Schiff has posited that the on and off again tariffs are part of a plan to manipulate the market, and I was wondering what you thought about that.
Yeah, I've heard various versions of that, and it's not economics, not my long suit, and I'm skeptical that Trump has anything that systematic in mind. I don't think that's the way he operates. I think he's had a bee in his bonnet for a long time about tariffs. He's talked about it from way back before he was a candidate for anything. And I think the way to understand it is what I said in my talk. It's an exercise in increasing his personal power. And I don't think there's much more to it than that.
Thank you. Rachel?
Hi, Professor. I loved what you said about telling the stories. However, that can backfire because who the heck am I to organize a group to tell stories, say in my synagogue or in my building? I would like to see how I can get an expert to help me organize the right people who are ripe for it, and then sit down and tell the stories. Who are these people who could help me? Is Indivisible going to, I hope to God, have a whole section of Indivisible to help people organize and tell stories? Because people can get awfully mad if you talk down to them.
Yeah, I think it's an important point, and I think you're right. The hope is that groups like Indivisible and Move On and the Working Families Party and Citizen Action and a bunch of the others that are on the list, the handout that you can get at the back of the church. I think the question, the hope is that those groups are savvy enough to do exactly what you're saying. So yeah, I agree completely.
Thank you. Maria, your turn.
Yep, just one last person, Dorothy, just.
Hi, I want to thank Michael for these sessions. They've been very informative.
I'm glad.
And I want to thank Ida for all of her efforts in getting us to this place. I'm trying to be hopeful and trying to look forward to what happens next. Michael, once we are out of the woods on this, is the U.S. capable of developing the safeguards to prevent this from happening again?
What a great question. I mean, the short answer is I don't know. The longer answer is it depends. When I was teaching, I always said to my students, the answer to every political question is it depends. So it depends. A lot of it, I think, depends on the quality of leadership that emerges. A lot of it depends on what people like us are able to do. And I mean that in at least two senses. I mean that in the sense of, can we keep our courage up? Can we keep our commitment up? Can we keep our energy up? Can we keep from getting depressed or overwhelmed or intimidated, the stuff that I talked about at the beginning? And can we find a way to work? that allows us to be effective? Those are big political questions. I think this situation puts the responsibility on those of us who haven't been, full-time political activists in the past. But as I've said a bunch of times, it behooves us to take that role because everything we care about's at stake. So I think part of the answer to your question is how well we learn, and how well we act, how well we rise to this occasion. And I don't mean that, that we need to be, working ourselves into the ground. That's not the answer. Driving ourselves crazy with anxiety, that's not the answer. But a measured commitment that takes into account our own personal well-being is what we need.
Joyce?
Thank you, Michael. We're going to have one more question. Sheldon, I'm going to ask you to be brief. You're next.
So, unfortunately, I'm afraid that we've got two big problems facing us. One is really of great magnitude, and we almost collapsed yesterday in the bond market. And it is a very serious condition. If these tariffs continue and the market turmoil increases, there could really be a run on the dollar. People should understand it. Yesterday, what happened in the morning was that the conversation from Trump was that the tariffs were going to continue on. That triggered a sell-off in bonds, especially by Japan and China. And there was no one willing to step forward to buy new bonds. This country, this economy, operates on selling treasuries. If there was no one willing to come forward, and the few people, the few entities that did want to come forward, they demanded higher interest rates. That bodes great problems for the country. The other thing I wanted to mention was that what Chris Murphy is really concerned about, and that is that he does not think that that there might be a free election in 2026. He is very frightened of that, and he was interviewed by David Remnick from the New Yorker, and he has expressed his concern about that. So, guys, think about those two things.
Michael, response? Or we have one more question here, if not.
I'm making this short and sweet like I am, very short and sweet. So I'm saying it made me very depressed. And I think you're preaching to the converted. We're all on the same page here, and I guess we all want to know, as before people start committing suicide, what to do next. But I think you answered that. You talked about social media. I want to know also how long Elon Musk has left before he can't work anymore, practice anymore. You know, he has a limited time, isn't that right? Elon Musk?
He was, supposedly 120 days, but it's going to be at Trump's discretion. He can play games with that. I think I wouldn't take that deadline very seriously. It's not it's not anything they can't get around. I think it's going to depend on Musk's calculation of his self-interest and Trump's calculation of his self-interest, and whether they feel they need each other or not. It's going to be a political decision, not a decision that's governed by any rules. These guys, they don't care about the rules.
Layoffs in the stock market is just not, it's just kind of depressing, all this stuff to a layperson. So I guess I should be answering the question, but you answered it in the way you said the media will help.
Mhm.
Social media, some people don't know how to use it. But I don't think the television channels and the radio stations are really helping us at all. They're just reporting. So I hope people will follow through. If they have all these marches in 50 states and you're saying he doesn't care about any of that. That's not to pick a cause. You
Yeah.
need to pick a cause. There are a lot of causes. You pick your cause and then you find the groups. There's lots of them. Of course,
Right.
I have to find a course.
Michael?
Yeah,
We're at time. So I'm going to give you a few minutes, a minute or less than a minute to wish us well.
I do wish you well. And I would make one comment about the 2026 election. It's one of the things that we should pay a lot of attention to. Obviously, in the Polish example, the existence of a free election was crucial in the ability of the pro-democratic forces to make a comeback. So we need to be extremely vigilant about any attempts either to rig that election or to cancel it altogether. And that's something that we should be very strongly prepared to mobilize around and take some risks to protect, because without free elections, there's no hope of reversing the trend toward oligarchy that's engulfing us now. And I'll leave
Okay.
it here.
So we have our work cut out for us to put our efforts towards the next election and to safeguard the safety of the election. And I thank you all for your attention tonight. Thank you, Michael, really from the bottom of my heart for doing this with us.
Melissa
Thank
just
you.
sent a message to use the 5 Calls app.
Yes. Yeah, if people know about that, 5calls.org gives you ideas of how to call your elected officials, and you can commit to 5 calls a day, 3 calls a day, whatever you can do. And it gives you, I don't know, 50 things that you can call about, and it gives you some background about it and a script. It makes it very, very easy, and it gives you also the phone number of the person to call. It's called 5calls.org. 5calls.org.
5 calls and you'll get it. Thank you.
5calls.org.
Number 5, yeah.
Heard that instead of kind of calling individually about one issue and then calling about one issue, calling about one issue.
They set it all up for you.
Yes, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But like when you're on the phone with a staffer or you're leaving a voicemail, just write down or copy these, whatever.
Sharon, did you have a question?
Put your scripts together about what's important to you, what you want to say, and just like one voicemail or one discussion with the staffer rather than just, so it's one phone call.
I don't know if you can hear that, Michael.
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah, okay, good. All right, very good.
Speeches, we can't get them online.
Yeah, they're online, and you said you would make the PowerPoints available to people if they're interested. Is that right, Michael?
Anybody who emails me is welcome to the PowerPoint.
Okay,
Krasner@gmail.com.
thank you. Thank you, everyone, and thank you especially to you, Michael.
I
Really
just
appreciate it.
read-
Welcome.
I think it's an important one to end with. Melissa again says, certainly the people united will never be defeated.
Here, here.
Thank you.